I doubt that he will reappear, but you never know. You must never.
The living legend of world comedy turned 70 with a shocking announcement.
For nearly 40 years, the world watched him stumble, smirk, and stay silent. A man who could reduce entire theaters to tears of laughter without ever uttering more than a handful of words. Now, that same man, a true icon of global comedy, has just crossed a milestone few could have imagined, his 70th birthday. And with it comes an announcement that's sending ripples through fans everywhere. Because behind those bulging eyes and that deadpan stare lies a story far stranger, far more human, and far more surprising than anyone ever suspected. After decades of whispers, wild rumors, and tabloid speculation, the real truth about the man behind Mr. Bean is finally stepping out of the shadows.
Billions of viewers and deep, previously undisclosed psychological scars of Rowan Atkinson.
Give me a moment to look into this. I want to check what's actually verifiable here before I continue the narration. Since this part makes some serious claims, a marital tragedy, hidden psychological scars, that I'd want to get right rather than just rephrase blindly. The story that broke into headlines wasn't just about a beloved comedy icon blowing out 70 candles. It was about the moment the mask finally slipped, the moment the man behind that teddy bear and that unforgettable stare stopped being a cartoonish figure of pure comedy and became something far more human. Because tucked behind billions of laughs generated over decades sits a life that includes real heartbreak, a marriage that ended in painful divorce, and personal struggles the actor kept carefully hidden from public view for years. It was early January 2025, and all eyes turned to Oxfordshire, England, where Rowan Atkinson quietly marked his 70th birthday. The milestone set off a wave of coverage across major outlets worldwide, each one digging deeper into the extraordinary body of work he's built over a lifetime in entertainment. And towering above everything else in that legacy, impossible to separate from the man himself, stands one character who made him a household name across the globe, Mr. Bean. For nearly 40 years, one theory refused to die, that Mr. Bean wasn't human at all, that he'd tumbled out of a flying saucer, an alien stranded on Earth, just like that eerie beam of light opening sequence seemed to suggest. And for just as long, Rowan Atkinson let the rumor sit there, unanswered. But at 70, sitting down for a string of candid interviews, he finally decided to set the record straight himself. Mr. Bean, he explained, was never meant to be some creature from outer space. If anything, the character was alien in a different sense entirely, alien to the world around him, not to this planet. Atkinson put it simply and unforgettably. Mr. Bean is a 9-year-old boy trapped inside a grown man's body. That single sentence unlocked everything. Suddenly, all those baffling, boundary-breaking antics made sense. The total absence of social filters, the complete disregard for etiquette or convention. It wasn't malice. It was a child's blend of innocence and self-interest, wearing an adult suit. These days, Atkinson lives quietly, tucked away at his home in Oxfordshire, deliberately cut off from the noise of modern life. No social media, no digital footprint, a firm wall between himself and the churn of celebrity culture he spent decades navigating. He's simply done chasing, or being chased by, the spotlight. But to really understand how a 9-year-old's mind ended up wearing a grown man's face, you have to go back before the cameras ever rolled, to where this whole strange journey actually started. The making of an icon. The birth of Mr. Bean wasn't a straight line to success. It was a gamble. In 1987, Atkinson took an early, unpolished version of the character to the Just for Laughs festival in Montreal and did something that sounds almost reckless in hindsight. He performed live in silence for a French-speaking crowd. It was a deliberate test. If physical comedy alone, no dialogue, no shared language could make that room laugh, then it could work anywhere in the world. It worked, and once the concept was proven, there was still the small matter of a name. Atkinson and his writing partner, Richard Curtis, kicked around a handful of alternatives, Mr. White, even Mr. Cauliflower, before eventually settling on the one that stuck. Mr. Bean officially premiered on British ITV on New Year's Day, 1990, and viewers were hooked from the very first scene. That now iconic image of Bean dropping out of a beam of light onto an empty London street. Remarkably, the entire original series ran for just 14 episodes, produced sporadically over several years, yet it kept shattering UK viewership records. The high-water mark came in 1992 with the episode The Trouble with Mr. Bean, which pulled in close to 19 million viewers. The character's appeal proved so universal that producers took the next logical step, the big screen. In 1997, the film, simply titled Bean, hit theaters worldwide and became an outright box office phenomenon, pulling in more than $250 million globally. Mr. Bean wasn't just a British hit anymore, he was a global institution. And with that kind of money suddenly in his pocket, Atkinson indulged a passion that had nothing to do with comedy, speed. He was a serious car enthusiast, and it wasn't long before that hobby collided, quite literally, with real danger. When the mask started to crack, in October 1999, disaster struck. Atkinson was behind the wheel of his prized McLaren F1 in Lancashire when he lost control and crashed, badly damaging the supercar in a violent collision. He survived without life-threatening injuries, but the accident left a lasting mark, not just on the car, but on him emotionally. It was the first sign that fame and fortune came with a price tag no one had accounted for. Worse was still to come. In March 2001, during a family holiday in Kenya, Atkinson found himself in a genuine life-or-death emergency. He, his wife, and their children were aboard a small Cessna flying from Mombasa to Nairobi when the pilot suddenly suffered a stroke mid-flight and lost consciousness. With no one else able to fly the plane, and Atkinson himself having zero piloting experience or training of any kind, he had no choice but to take the controls himself. For several agonizing minutes, he fought to keep the aircraft level, somehow preventing it from going into a fatal dive, until the pilot came to and managed to bring the plane down safely. That brush with death in the African sky wasn't the last time Atkinson's love of speed nearly cost him everything. In August 2011, history repeated itself in a far more violent way. Driving that same McLaren F1 through Northamptonshire, he lost control at high speed, slammed into a tree, and the car burst into flames. Atkinson came away with a fractured shoulder blade and a serious concussion, while the supercar itself was destroyed. The insurance payout to rebuild it reportedly reached hundreds of thousands of pounds, a S. Tory that made headlines across Britain in its own right. As if physical danger wasn't enough, Atkinson's personal life was quietly unraveling too. After more than 24 years together, his marriage to makeup artist Sunitra Sastry came to an end between late 2014 and early 2015. The divorce proceedings, held at a central London court, wrapped up in a matter of seconds, the judge granting the split on grounds of irreconcilable differences almost as soon as it began, a swiftness that stunned the press covering it. Not long after, Atkinson began a new relationship with comedian Louise Ford, nearly 3 decades his junior, and the news set off yet another round of tabloid frenzy. Even that wasn't the full weight he carried. Across 2012, 2013, and 2016, false rumors of his death from accidents from illness repeatedly swept across the internet, each one forcing him to publicly resurface just to prove he was still alive. Between the real brushes with death, the collapse of his marriage, and having to constantly deny his own demise online, the toll became impossible to ignore. Something in him had had enough of the gray suit, the bulging eyes, the character the whole world thought it knew. By 2016, the pull to step away from the comedic mask that had defined half his life was becoming impossible to resist. Determined to break free from expectations, Atkinson made a deliberate pivot, turning down the physical comedy that had defined his career in favor of something with real dramatic weight. He took on the role of Jules Maigret, the legendary French detective, in the ITV series simply titled Maigret. It was about as far from Mr. Bean as an actor could get. Quiet, measured, sharp-witted, a man who thought before he moved. For Atkinson, it was a chance to prove to critics and audiences alike that there was far more range in him than a rubber face and a teddy bear. Critics responded well, but no matter how strong the reviews, the public's appetite for silent slapstick never quite let him escape the shadow of his most famous creation. The strain of carrying that shadow for decades finally spilled out into the open in a candid 2021 interview with Radio Times. Atkinson admitted plainly that stepping into Mr. Bean's skin had never been easy, that the physical demands, the pressure of making an entire planet laugh without saying a word, had worn on him more than people realized. He confessed he genuinely preferred voicing the animated version of the character over squeezing back into that tight gray suit for live action. Age had caught up with him, and the punishing physical pace the role demanded was no longer something his body could sustain the way it once had. And yet, for all his talk of moving on, Atkinson couldn't fully walk away from what clearly still worked. In 2022, he teamed up with Netflix for a comedic series called Man vs. Bee. But even then, he was careful to draw a hard line between this new character and his old one. His new creation, Trevor Bingley, he told the press, was a decent, well-meaning man who simply had terrible luck, nothing like the true nature of Mr. Bean. When it came to describing Bean himself, Atkinson didn't hold back, calling him narcissistic and anarchic, a character with no interest whatsoever in playing by anyone else's rules. It was a telling distinction, and it revealed something deeper, an artist quietly pushing back against being permanently boxed into one role. But while Atkinson tried to close that chapter on his own terms, the internet had other plans. Across Reddit and YouTube, fan communities kept dissecting old Mr. Bean footage frame by frame, spinning up endless theories, everything from amateur psychological profiles to those persistent alien origin claims, racking up millions of views in the process. Mr. Bean had, in a very real sense, outgrown his creator. He'd become something living on his own, out in the wild of internet culture, well beyond Atkinson's control. To understand why Atkinson built such an airtight wall of silence around himself, you have to go all the way back to where it all began, to a childhood that looked nothing like the fame that eventually followed, where the silence was born. Rowan Sebastian Atkinson was born on January 6, 1955, in the small farming community of Consett, County Durham, England. He was raised in a strict, disciplined household on a working farm, and that upbringing shaped him into a reserved, quiet child from the very start. But there was something else he was carrying, too, a genuine, severe stutter, one that hit him hardest on words starting with certain sounds, like B and W at St. B's school. That stutter made him an easy target. Classmates teased him mercilessly, and between the speech impediment and his natural shyness, young Rowan learned early to keep his distance from crowds just to avoid the mockery. But underneath all of that was a remarkably sharp mind. Academically, he excelled, eventually earning a place at Newcastle University, where he completed a degree in electrical engineering, a genuine point of pride for his family. He didn't stop there. In 1975, he continued on to the Queen's College, Oxford, where he went on to earn a master's degree in the same field.
This clear
That
distinction
engineering
shows the artist's
background
subtle
gave him something
resistance to
unexpected,
being confined to
an
a
intensely
single image
analytical,
throughout his artistic
almost
career.
mathematical
While
way
the
of
veteran
thinking,
actor
one
himself
he'd later
always sought
apply to
escape
something far
and close
removed
a
from
chapter of
circuits
his
and
career in
equations,
silence,
the precise
internet operated in
choreography
a
of physical
completely
comedy.
opposite direction.
It was at
On
Oxford
major
in
social media
1976
platforms like
that
Reddit
everything
and YouTube,
changed.
fan
Atkinson
communities
met a fellow
continuously
student
kept
named
the
Richard
carrot by
Curtis,
dissecting old
the same
footage.
Richard
A
Curtis
plethora
who
of
would go on to
theories
co-create
analyzing
Mr.
criminal
Bean and Blackadder
psychology
with him,
and
and that
in-depth
friendship
research
pulled the
articles on
shy
the
engineering
extraterrestrial
student toward the
origins of the
Oxford
Mr. Bean
Revue Drama
character
Club.
have been
And there
continuously
on
produced and
stage,
attracted
something
millions of
extraordinary
online
happened.
views.
The stutter that had
spontaneous and
followed him
rapid
his
growth
whole
of the
life
online
simply
community
vanished the
has
moment he stepped into
transformed Mr.
character
Bean
and let
into
his
an
body do
independent
the talking
cultural
instead of his
entity
voice.
beyond the
It
control
wasn't just
of
a
its creator.
coincidence.
Faced with
It
the
was,
persistent
in
haunting
effect,
of past
a form
glory,
of self-therapy
Rowan
he'd
Atkinson
stumbled
is
into
forced
completely
to
by
re-examine
accident proof
the very
that
roots
performance
of
could
his
free him
life.
from a burden that
In
words
October
alone never
1999,
could.
a shocking event
That
occurred when
discovery
Rowan
became the
Atkinson
seed
was
of
involved in
everything
his
that
first
followed.
serious car accident
Atkinson
in Lancashire.
realized
The
silence
legendary
wasn't a
McLaren
limitation.
F1 supercar
It was a
he was
tool,
driving lost control
one capable of
and suffered
communicating more
extensive
directly
damage
and more
after a violent
universally than
collision on the
dialogue
street.
ever could.
This serious
The bullying
traffic
he endured
accident
as a
not only
child,
destroyed part of the
fused with this
expensive
newfound
supercar,
refuge in
but
wordless
also dealt us a
expression,
severe blow
became
to
the
the
raw
artist's
material
mental
for his
state.
life's greatest
Although he
work.
miraculously
Every
survived
awkward
and
glance,
did not suffer
every
life-threatening
exaggerated gesture
injuries,
Mr. Bean
Rowan
ever made
Atkinson
on
still
screen
experienced a
traces
long
back to a
period of
boy who
emotional
once
trauma.
struggled just to get a
This
sentence
event
out.
quickly became a hot
From a
topic in the
stammering,
news,
isolated
exposing
schoolboy
the
to an
risky,
Oxford
hidden
master's
aspects of
graduate,
the private
and
life of
finally
the
to one of the
powerful
most
man
recognized
behind the
comedic
character
performers on the
Mr.
planet.
Bean.
It's
But
a
this
journey built
uncontrollable
entirely
fame
on turning private
inadvertently
pain
became a
into something
magnet.
the whole
To
world could
understand
laugh
why
at together.
such a solid
The mask
fortress of
Atkinson
silence has
built
been erected
was never
in the
really
heart
about
of the
hiding from an
entertainment
audience.
world. The
It
public
started as a
needs to
way
go
of
back
hiding
in
a flaw
time
he was
to the
ashamed
very
of,
beginnings
and
of
understanding
his
that is
childhood.
really the key to
Early
understanding
years
everything
at the
he's
deep
built
track
since.
that earned him much
Looking at the full
admiration.
arc of his life,
Rowan
from a difficult
Atkinson
childhood
passed
to the
entrance
reflections
exam
he
to
shared at
Newcastle
70,
University
it's
and
clear that
successfully
every laugh
completed his
Mr.
studies,
Bean has ever
earning a
earned came
bachelor's
from
degree
something
in
real.
electrical engineering,
He may be an
much to
eccentric,
his
wordless
family's delight.
outsider on
Not stopping
screen,
there,
but
he
that's
continued
exactly
his
why he
academic journey by
resonates.
transferring
There's
to
a
the
part of
Queen's
all of
College,
us that
an
recognizes
institution
him,
affiliated
the
with the
awkward,
prestigious University
unfiltered,
of
childlike
Oxford
part
in
we don't often get to show
1975.
the world.
It was at Oxford